Welcome to PropTech Pulse, the podcast that takes the pulse of prop technology in multifamily. I'm your host, Shelley Robinson, and each week we'll be diving deep into innovations, challenges, and the future of work in property technology and multifamily. From AI-driven property management to blockchain and real estate, we're here to explore how technology is reshaping the way we live, work, and invest in multifamily communities. Whether you're a property manager, a tech entrepreneur, an executive, or even simply curious about the future of living spaces, PropTech Pulse is your weekly dose of insights and inspiration. So let's sync our rhythms and get on with the show. It's time to take the pulse. Welcome to PropTech Pulse. I have a great guest with me today, Michele. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Shelley. An awesome job pronouncing my name right. You're one in a million people who actually do that correctly. So thank you.
I hear you there. And I bet you also get a bunch of first name variations from time to time too in spelling. So I can relate.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I was so glad that you agreed to come on the podcast. And you and I know each other actually from the industry over the years. And I think we've got a great topic to talk with our guests today. But before we get into the topic, why don't you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself and kind of your journey in multifamily and prop tech and what's kind of brought you to this point in your career journey today?
Sure. So trying to think of the high points here, right? Because I can tell you the whole story and probably fill up a whole hour just talking about that. But just to start, especially with people who haven't been in the industry long, or even those of us who have, it's a pretty familiar story. I feel like for most people, I just kind of fell into the industry. I actually went to college out of high school for veterinary science. So one of the things that a lot of people don't know about me is I have a veterinary science degree, did that for a while. Back to school, got my degree in business and travel. And I was in the career center at college trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And there happened to be a recruiter from a large multifamily operations company in the career center. And she said, what do you want to do? And I said, I just really want to travel. But I can really do anything. I'm smart. I'm a hard worker. I'll figure it out. And she said, well, I know this company that's looking for property managers. Would that be something you're interested in? And I said, I have no idea what that means, but sure, why not? And, over 20 years later, here we are. I'm still in the industry. I've done a lot of different roles, like I feel like many people have. From property management to due diligence, acquisitions, asset management. But really, most of my career was spent on the owner-manager side and really on that sort of, if you call it a startup or acquisitions or property takeover, SWAT team, some people call it, in that kind of an environment, real fast-paced, really going out to new sites, doing takeovers and transitions. And that's what I was doing at my last position. I actually had two teams where I oversaw our due diligence and acquisitions team as well as application support. And it was a good mix because, as we're going to talk about a little bit today, when you're taking over properties, there's a lot of software that goes along and software changes and data migration that has to happen as part of that. So it was a good combination. Left that, came over to the dark side, as they say, on the supplier side, and work with 111 and run the best application support team really in the business. So I've been here now about 6 years and absolutely couldn't see myself doing anything else.
I love stories of career development and falling into multifamily. I had the opinion back in the day that it was, a couple sitting in an apartment smoking filterless Pall Mall cigarettes, green shag carpet on the floor. So I had no idea how big and how much opportunity there was for a great career in multifamily until you kind of fall into it. So I love your story. And
Absolutely.
Animals as well.
And it's funny, Shelley, because I even think I did a property acquisition with a woman working in the leasing office with a shag rug with the filterless Pall Malls and a big yellow stain in the ceiling above her head, where she obviously did her paperwork every day. And she just was a smoking fool. Yeah.
Oh my
So
God.
they're still out there. Yeah.
That is its own episode, right? What you find on property takeovers. Oh my gosh, that could fill up a day. Well,
Absolutely.
this topic of data migrations it's not a sexy topic.
I
It,
know. I was just going to say, I think probably at least a dozen people probably just like said, I don't really want to listen to this.
it's also a really prominent topic. Every conversation I have in the industry, whether it's on the supplier side, the services side, or even ownership and operations, it's all about data, 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 data. And data migrations, especially on property takeover or software changes, there's so many things that can happen. So it's an overwhelming topic. I think that's why it's not sexy. It's overwhelming. And there's a ton of data, and the data has a lot of value. So I thought you and I could kind of chat about best practices and frameworks when companies are starting to think about and tackle this non sexy topic of data.
Non-sexy, right? And somehow I always find myself in these nonsense sexy topic conversations, but it's what we do, right? It's what we love, and it's a big part of technology. I would say that some of the things, I talk to people at all levels, right, of companies, and whether it's a software company or property management company, fee manager, owner manager, it doesn't matter. Everybody is impacted when you transfer data, and even up to the big investment firms. I was just talking to somebody the other day, and they were trying to analyze their data, and they said they're really struggling because they're an investment firm and they have several different property management firms, and they all have their own different chart of accounts. And how can they compare? They may have two different property management firms that have properties right down the street from each other, but they can't even compare them because the data doesn't match. And then they have to go through this big, obnoxious mapping exercise and figure out what goes where. And then you got to make the software pull the reports and two different charts. And oh gosh, I could talk about that in and of itself forever, right? Because it's just the data doesn't match. And so one of the things that I always tell, especially people that don't do this for a living, is it's a problem to solve, and you need to think about it early on. So if you're a smaller company, a newer company, somebody who's getting into the space, really think through that and really think of the future in mind, because that can get away from you so quickly if you don't have a plan to manage that. It impacts everything from financial reporting to your business intelligence tools to the day-to-day software and the day-to-day on-site teams. It impacts everyone. So it's really important to think about that and have a plan. And if you are gonna be those really brave souls that take on chart of account mapping, really have a plan for doing that and who's doing that and how you're going to maintain that. Because one of the other things to think about is, even if you just add a GL account, right, then you have all these other mapped chart of accounts that you have to consider as well. So it becomes a lot more to manage than just, oh, I'm buying a property, right? That is one piece of it, but there are all these other pieces, and it's a huge ripple effect that impacts a large part of the business. So really start thinking about that. So that's sort of high level. The problem with our industry, there's a lot of great things about our industry, but one of the problems with our industry is that we everything is different. So our systems are different. We talked about chart of accounts. The systems are different. The way the systems ingest data, the way that systems output data, even the access levels that you have to data within the system is all different. So that's a big problem to try to tackle. It's like the elephant in the room, right? Like, how do you do that? And how do you get private businesses that have very unique ways of running their businesses and managing their own data to get on board with having one systemic approach? And it's a big conversation. So shameless plug, I'm on the National Apartment Association Technology Committee, we're getting ready to gear up for Apartmentalize here in less than a month, if you can believe it. And that's one of the things we talk about all the time. Is there a way to get everybody on the same page about data mapping, right? Is it a resident ID or is it a tenant ID or is it something else, right? Like, do you use the unit number for that? Like, even just something as basic as that, is there a way that we can basically call something one thing, have a glossary and say, these are our generally accepted terms, kind of like accounting, right?
Yeah,
Kind of
language.
like, yeah,
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 totally.
are generally accepted terms, and we're all going to use this. You can't really force people to do that, but if there was a way to get people on board to do that, it would make a lot of these things a lot simpler. But that's pie in the sky, right? That's like Michelle's dream, if there is one, to get more of an industry-wide standard. And that doesn't really help us where we are today, right? But it is an idea. So I'll throw that out there. Anybody who wants to get on board with me, by all means, would love to chat about that, because I think it could definitely be where we're headed.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And what I'm hearing you saying too is, there's the data that is, and there's the systems that are, and then tackling like a universal data strategy on top of that. When you work with different companies when they're working on data migrations, what are some of the best practices when they start to approach kind of working on standardizing their data and getting it set up so that when they do acquisitions and even dispositions, that things go better? What are some kind of the best practices and frameworks that you see work in the industry? Who do you bring into the conversation? How's the change management? Like, I can think of so many things coming to mind on this topic right now. My mind's exploding.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It actually doesn't start with the data, right? It actually starts with the people, because the change management is huge, and making sure everybody understands the expectations right out of the gate. So in a previous life, what we would do whenever we were doing acquisitions is we would have these sort of brain trust calls, if you would, about the acquisition with each different department. And we would say, here's the expectations. It includes things as close date, what system are they on? What system are they coming from? All the way down to the human resource, who's on site, who's staying on site, what are those people used to doing now? Understanding all of those components, because the data is important, but as an operator, you never want to rely on data that you're getting from another previous company, right? And, there's some that are great and there's some that maybe are not so great. And so you don't know. So instead of relying heavily on the data that you're getting being 100% accurate, you need to make sure you understand the full picture of everything. So that's sort of step one, is make sure you understand the landscape of that property and what you're actually getting. The second thing I would tell you is that works really well for us is talk to your acquisitions people. Acquisitions people are phenomenal when it comes to doing deals. What they don't always have their arms around is what the important things are to make sure that operations is set up for success. So really sitting down with them and saying, here are some things that you can do, some simple things that you can do for me that will help me to set this property up to get the returns that you want out of this property. That's speaking their language and understanding what speaks to them. And so a simple thing that, it seems like a simple thing, but I know it's very hard. So people might not like this answer, but is have yourself a set of standard reports by system with the filters outlined. This is something we provide our clients all the time. Give this to the outgoing management company and tell them, these are the reports that you want. These are the filters to set when they pull the reports, so that you can get those standardized reports. Now, sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't, right? Because is it in their best interest or not to do it? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I'll find that the more larger property management firms that have been in the industry that have a good name, we all know them, will typically try to do everything that they can to be a good partner in those scenarios. There's others, maybe not so much. But if you provide them with that, or even attach it to your LOI or your PSA or one of those agreements to say, or in your due diligence packet, here's what I expect. Here's the timeline on what I need them. Here are the key dates that we need. We need to know when your sites are going dark. When are your sites actually logging off of the system? When will there be no activity left in your system? Those are key dates. And as much as you can funnel that information through your acquisitions team, the better off that data that you receive is going to be. Because I can tell you, I joke around a lot of times with our clients that we've gotten stuff sometimes that it looked like somebody wrote it on a napkin and it was like, here's my resident information. And you're like, I don't even know what to do with this. Or, in non-property management software, right? Like a QuickBooks or, you know, there's still like some Timberline and some of that kind of stuff out there too, where you're scratching your head wondering how they got through the day with that. But some of that you're going to get what you're going to get. So you can't avoid those, but as much as you can control what you're getting for the data, the easier your life is going to be when you do go to put that data in your own system. So those are some of the things that we try to do and we try to help our clients with.
Here are two things here and really important. This is a small, big industry. If you're not a good partner on these acquisitions and dispositions, that reputation gets around and it's not a good one. And so I'm always flabbergasted when I hear stories of people not partnering on the data side, because you may end up working there later, or you might end up losing business later. Like it's
Right.
so important to be a good industry partner, even if you're
Yeah.
risk management.
Or even potential employees, right? Like
Yeah.
there's places that I knew I went into, I did a takeover one time. I'm trying to remember where it was. I think it was maybe in Alabama. It's an Alabama market. And the outgoing management company took all the wayfinding signs with them. And I was like, what was the point of that? Did you think we were going to get lost when we got on site? Be able to find the pool or, the buildings? Like, I was like, that I don't understand,
Right? Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. The second thing I heard, and I've heard those stories too, been involved in a couple of those acquisitions. Second one is proper incentives for acquisitions to partner across those kind of siloed areas. And these conversations are woven across the industry as well. In every department, it's like we have to learn how to help each other. And sometimes those incentives need to be tied in. And I think too many times acquisitions just incentivize not closing the deal and making sure the deal actually closes in a way where you can effectively run it. And so making sure those proper handoffs and reports and different items are there so that operations can be successful. And it affects NOI on these acquisitions if you end up delayed for an extra week or two where you can't operate except manually. So really, really good
Yeah.
that you're sharing here, Michele.
Well, and you think about it too. So the first company I worked for, we used to call it a startup, right? And so you had a startup phase. And what I started to figure out in that startup phase is and I traveled all over the country doing this, but I figured that I could get my startup up and running faster and better and have that property running as what we would call a maintenance community
Yes.
faster if I had everything I need day one and I communicated what I needed quickly.
Yeah.
And so if you think about it from that perspective, if I'm an acquisitions person and I want to recognize those returns faster, I want to know, what do I need to do on that sale and on that initial piece to make sure that that property can be up and fully functional as quickly as possible. So be using that mindset and saying like, look, these are just a few little things you can do. And I certainly wouldn't overwhelm them, right? Like I wouldn't go to them with a 15 tab Excel workbook with, 30 lines on each a 30 line checklist on each page. Like, let's not do that, right? But like, even just starting small to say these 2 or 3 things will help me. Let's get used to that. and then, start to fold in a little bit of refinement, learn from your mistakes. We've all made mistakes on acquisitions, right? And we've, had sort of bruised our knees, if you will, or stubbed our toe on some of them. And I think as long as you learn from that, you continue to get better and better every time. My last company, we did, I want to say the first year we were growing a ton. And one of the first years I ran the acquisition team, we were on the road doing either a due diligence or a takeover 48 weeks that year. And so you start to get really good at being efficient so you can get in and out of there and done, because the next week you got to go to the next property. So you can't take 2 days, 3 days to kind of get your druthers about you once you get back home. You have to get things done so you can keep moving. And so the way that you can do that is look at your resources, look at who you have on your team, figure out those efficiencies that you can ask for people to help you with so that you can continue to just churn through those acquisitions as they come.
On that note, and then on the change management and the efficiency and the data migration side, how do you work with site teams who may not understand the importance and the why? Sometimes people are newer in their careers. I certainly was there. I started out as a leasing consultant with complete, deer in the headlights at first. What are some of your best practices around data migrations and transitions with regard to the site?
So I think the first thing I would say is on the sales side. So if you're on a property and it's the dreaded thing where your regional or your RVP calls you and says your property's going on the market, and you kind of go through this sort of panic phase, right? And we've all been there, and it's fair. You have to go through that phase. You have to get through it. And then once you can kind of come to grips with the reality that this is happening, what I will tell you is more often than not, I always start with the people side, but more often than not, just to share this in my experience is in doing acquisitions, that when people are on a site that's getting acquired, you actually find yourself having more opportunity than less.
I
And
agree.
that's a really cool place to be, because you can decide if you stay with a company you're currently at, if you love it and it's a company you want to stay with, and they have a sister property or something else at the corporate office or something you can do, that's an option. Or you can go with the new company and check them out, and maybe they have more opportunities or a bigger footprint in your area or what have you. So first, I would say take that into consideration first. Get yourself out of the sort of panic phase. And then what we used to do is, as part of, I created sort of a disposition plan in a previous life, and I would go around to properties that I knew were for sale, and I would work with the teams, and I would say, let's act like this is a due diligence. Let's do a file audit. Let's walk all your apartments. Let's, audit your security deposits. Let's make sure everything is clean, because what you don't want to have happen is a buyer comes out, looks at your property, does due diligence, and they go back to the corporate office or they go back to your acquisitions team and say, hey, we want to retrade and we want a discount on this property because there's a bunch of missing security deposits. And as an on-site person, that falls on you,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
So
It does.
make sure your house is in order. Make sure if you're hearing that your property could get sold or we're putting it on the market and it may not get sold, right, is the reality. But start thinking about, if I was going to do a file audit, what are those data points that I think are important, right? What are my rents? How many month to month leases do I have? All of those pieces, and start to think about that, because you said it earlier, Shelley, like this is a small industry and this is your reputation, especially if you're a property manager. This is your reputation, and you're going to have people looking under the hood of your property like you have never seen before.
It's so true.
So make sure that everything is good. And like I said, people make mistakes, things happen, we've all done it. But the more you can get your team involved and get excited about, let's do an audit, let's see where we're at, make sure everything's right, and get excited about that and the potential that could be there, the better off everyone is going to be. So that's sort of what I would say on the sales side. On the sort of purchase side. So if you're on a property and it's, you're getting purchased, and the new management has come in, you've made the decision, you're going to stay with the incoming management team. Know your property, know your data, know your team, know your residents, right? Really make sure you have your finger on the pulse, because the property managers are really the knowledge bank of the property. So make sure you have all of that information. And just a quick story about me. I was working for a company, and the biggest KPI they had was cash received, right? How much cash is in the bank? Cash received, cash received. That's all I knew. And I went to another company and they wanted to know NOI, what's your NOI? And I'm like, I don't even know what that is.
Yep. Different
What,
different business model, right?
how, what have I got myself into? Right. And so I had to figure that out. I had to call some friends that I had made in the industry and say, like, hey, like, how do I do this? I had a new regional, I had a new team, I had a new accounting team. I had no idea. So I had to figure it out. So use your network, understand what those KPIs are. The other thing is, if you're a fee manager, again, this is another story about me. If an owner would walk on property, I'd like almost immediately lose every piece of data that was in my brain that I
Oh my gosh, I can totally relate to that. I get so nervous. Oh
what's
my
your occupancy? I don't know.
God.
Gone, right? Like I can't even think about it. So I used to have this was of course back in the day when we all had binders and leasing binders, but I would have either a clipboard or a binder, and I'd have all my KPIs from that morning. I'd fill it all in. I'd write it down, like physically with pen and paper, write it down. Because if I wrote it down, it would stick in my head a little bit better, and I may not even need to reference it. But I didn't go on a property tour. I didn't tour an apartment. I didn't go anywhere out of my office without that clipboard attached to me, because I knew if somebody asked me, I had to have that number. And even just having it there with me was enough of a sort of a security blanket that I would remember it a lot easier. So it's so common. Even on property tours, when I would go look at acquisitions and stuff, I'd get there and the property manager would be like, oh, and I'd say, it's okay. It's okay. It's all right. Let's go through your KPIs together. Let's look in your system. Let's find it. Let's jot it down so you're ready. Because there's nothing worse than that feeling of just not knowing and not having an answer right in the moment.
Survival brain that's in all of us, right? Once the adrenaline starts flowing, such a good best practice. On the corporate side of the data migrations, kind of what are the best practices that you tend to work alongside? Maybe it's the business intelligence team and the technology team and asset management and operations when you're going through these data migrations. What tends to work there? Because it gets real, like you said, it gets really complicated along the way.
It is really complicated. And I would say at the corporate level, the biggest thing that I've seen that's a struggle is for operations to understand that it's not a push a button and the data's there. That's not how it works. I wish that was the way that it worked. And even, most systems these days have, a system to system database copy or whatever, so you can move the data over. There's still so much work to be done because one database and another database aren't set up the same. So even when you move the data over, you still have to go through. Sometimes it's unit by unit and clean stuff up. Even that still takes a lot of time. So unfortunately, although I understand, and again, you and I have been on site, right? Like you understand you want that system to be live, especially if those are new employees. You want it to be live as quickly as possible, but you also want it to be right. So
Yeah.
you have to understand, if you want it to be live quickly and you want it to be correct, there's going to be a time delay. Like, and I even joke around with my team sometimes, you can have one or the other, right? Like, you can have it quick or you can have it right. Like you can't have it all the ways unless you're willing. You can have it right, but you have to be reasonable on the time. So, and I think that's a big one. Like people don't seem to get how much work it actually is. And so I would say working together, understanding that timeline, as well as communication. So whether it's with operations, even facilities to some degree, will want to know, like, what are the work orders that were open on this property before, we took over? What's the CapEx plan? What are all those things? Communication is important. So that's the other thing we used to do is every day post close, we would have a huddle every morning and say, where are you at? What's going on? So that a communication email could go out to all of the stakeholders, including the leadership team. This is where everything is at this property. And if we're stuck, this is where we're stuck, and this is what we're doing to get unstuck. So that way everybody had complete visibility into that. Now, I have a couple people on my team that I'll share that love doing data conversions. I think they're a little bit strange, but they love it. They love the data. They love rolling up their sleeves.
God,
I know,
thank
right? Thank God for
right?
them. But what I will say is that it certainly takes a certain kind of person to love doing that work. But what I will say is for those people that find themselves in that position that are doing that work, number one, try to make it as scripted as possible. Again, you're going to get information that's outside, that's an outlier, that's not the same every time. Use that standard report sheet. Build yourself a conversion workbook or a settings workbook or something like that that you can use. Run it through your operators. Run it through and say, this is what I'm working from. What is the issue? Is this make sense to you? Go in the back into your system, look at your settings, see if that matches your policy. Really take the time to build out that workbook. And then also really communicate to your operators that, hey, there's a validation component here, and we need to decide who's validating the data, because once it's validated, it's on the operators to own it. And so if you validate it and you say, yeah, everything's fine, and it's now live, and your on-site team has to figure out what to do if it's not right. So is it going to be the operators that validate it? Is it going to be the system people that validate it? Who's going to validate it? And what is that time frame? Because the longer we take to validate, the longer that time frame gets for it to actually be live. So you really want to spend some time sitting down and explaining, and also help them understand what validation means, right? You could do a validation very quickly if you figure out your data points and you figure out your totals. You can do that fairly quickly. And by the way, I can count on maybe one hand, maybe two, the number of conversions that I've seen that have been 100% accurate. Now, my team's very, very good. I will tell you that. They're quick, they're really accurate. But again, sometimes you get data that's incorrect from the seller, or the reports don't work, or the system has an issue, or whatever, right? Things can go wrong. So 9 times out of 10, there's some time afterwards. We usually say 30 days, give it through a month-end cycle to make sure all your data is correct, and have a plan for when that data is not correct. Again, is it the on-site people that are going to fix it? Is it your help desk? Is it your software provider that did the migration, your consultant, whoever did the migration? What does that look like, and how are you going to communicate? So really have a plan. I almost look at it as every acquisition is a mini project. So if you were to build a project plan and your deliverables and your milestones along with that, that's the way to do it. We built I don't know if people here use Asana or your listeners use Asana, but we used to have a template in Asana that was a project plan every time we did an acquisition, and assignments to each department and all of that, because it really was a mini project every single time we did a property takeover with different stakeholders and different deliverables. And the applications team and the conversions team was no exception, right? They had their list of things that they did, how they did it, what they did, what their timeline was. And so all of that was built out right in that system. So using a system like that to help you manage that, I think is another critical component to being successful.
I love it. I love it. Any other best practices that you want to share?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I will say that I kind of learned early on in this is not necessarily overcommitting, but I've also put myself in a position to do this too fast, right? And to set expectations and, got some pressure like this needs to be turned around really, really fast. and worked my team probably too hard to meet that. And so I would say if you have a team or you have people that are doing this, understand that there's times that that's going to happen and that's okay, but it should be the exception, right? Everybody talks about work-life balance and making sure that you have, time to decompress, and people are always better when they have that time to themselves with their family, and really thinking about that. And if there's an exception that comes up and it's like, man, we really have to get this done for this owner, the property or whatever the situation is, that's the exception. Don't burn your people out and have expectations that this is going to be live in 24 hours, from sending the reports, because that's just not reasonable. If somebody were to, I'll give you my estimate on this. If somebody were to sit down from the day to get reports to the day that it goes live, or the time that it goes live, if the person is head down, working completely start to finish, no distractions, no interruptions, no nothing, and that's all they're doing, you're looking at, on average, probably a 12 to 14 hour turnaround. So expecting somebody to do it in one day is probably not a good practice.
The type of work that you're saying, where it takes a special type of person to begin with, requires breaks. Like, I would think every hour you would need to get up, clear your head, and be like, dust off that cloud, and then go back to it after you take a walk outside in the sun for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something.
Right.
It is not easy work. So
it's not. You kind of start to go cross-eyed, right? Looking at all that data after a while, and that's when you make mistakes, right? So again, it can be faster, it can be right. Like you can't have both, because you are looking at a lot of data. We're working on some automation of that, so more to come. I don't want to get too ahead of myself on that, but exciting stuff coming so that we can offer our clients. So that's really, really cool to help us with that. But I think the other thing I will say is it's hard for property management firms to have a person that does this, because unless you're like my old company that was, buying like crazy, if you're doing property takeovers all the time, that's one thing. But if you're buying like 2 or 3 properties, a quarter, you don't have a full-time person sitting around. So what happens with their other job while they're doing this? That gets to be really challenging, because that work's still there. That work doesn't just go away because you have an acquisition. So really think about the staffing and how you're going to accommodate the need for that.
Love it. Well, I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm really looking forward to seeing you at Apartmentalize and catching up in person together. That's going to be really nice. And we'll make sure we put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the company as well in the episode when we launch it.
Absolutely. And like you said, I can't believe we already made it through 40 minutes.
It goes fast. It goes really fast. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I think this is a great conversation, timely. I think the landscape now is people are hoping acquisitions pick up. And I think that still remains to be seen, but great best practices to share and preparation. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me, Shelley. Always good to spend time with you. And as you mentioned, people can connect with me on LinkedIn. Come see me. I'll be at Apartmentalize. I'll be in Vegas all week. So please reach out. Love to connect with anybody that's in the industry, because I do love this industry. So excited to see everyone there.
And that wraps up another episode of PropTech Pulse. I hope this conversation has given you valuable insights and perhaps even sparked some ideas for your own PropTech journey. Remember, the future of multifamily is being written right now with every technological advance and innovative solution. So stay curious, stay connected, and keep your finger on the pulse of PropTech. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to PropTech Pulse on your favorite podcast platform and share this along with your colleagues. You can also find us on social media for bite-sized insights and updates. I'm Shelley Robinson, and until next time, let's keep innovating, disrupting, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in PropTech and multifamily. Let's build it together.